I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Boulder Valley School Board of Education, October 9th. Roll call, please.
Benford. Fuqua. Garcia. Gebhardt.
Here.
Marquis. Myers. Sargent.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to remind everybody that the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children can thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. Good evening, everybody joining us here at the Education Center and those of you watching or listening at home. We're glad to have you observe and participate in our meetings. We'll begin, as always, with Superintendent's report. Dr. Anderson, good evening.
Board President Marquis, members of the board, thank you. Exciting few weeks here in the district. Wanted to give the board another update on our 100-day plan. So far, I've visited 52 schools throughout the district. Of those schools, I've done 28 in-depth visits where I've actually met and engaged directly with the entire faculty, staff, and leadership of each school. And I'm halfway through those visits. I've been keeping me very busy, but it's just the right place to be. It has been so wonderful being so close to schools, hearing directly from our talented teachers, leaders, and staff. And so I've really, really enjoyed the engagement part of the 100-day plan. If you were to go to our website at bvsd.org for the public and for the board, you already know this. We've kept a website that's tracking all 27 items of the 100-day plan around equity, excellence, and engagement. And I'm proud to say 6 of those are already completed. One of those, which was really an important event for us, was on September 29th at our Equity Summit. And so I want to thank the board members that were able to attend, Richard and Kathy. It was a wonderful opportunity to engage 140 plus members of our community around conversations in equity and what does that mean and what would that look like for the future of Boulder Valley School District. Just really inspiring day, and so that was something I really enjoyed participating in. Last Monday I had our first community meet and greet. We have 9 of those scheduled. So the first one was at Boulder High School. I want to thank all the parents, Dr. Hill for hosting. Was a wonderful event and got a chance to share a little bit about myself and learn a little bit about the community as well. It's been wonderful. The next meet and greet that we have is tomorrow evening at Centaurus High, so we encourage all interested parents to come out and students and staff as well. Would be wonderful. Also, since we've last met, I wanted to share an update on Eisenhower Elementary School. And so we know that we had some parents, some teachers come forward with some concerns. I've been engaged. I was actually there visiting on last Thursday, and I had a chance to speak with the leadership, speak with the teachers, heard a lot of the frustrations, and understand those. I will tell you that our staff is working diligently towards our deadline that we gave, which is mid-October. But we want to make sure that we not just finish, but we want to make sure it's done right. So we have intensive staff time being spent. We have our project manager there. We have Dave Egan, who's our liaison between the project manager and the principal, there every single day. Rob Price is there several times a week. Know that we won't rest until this gets done. We're not where we want to be, and we continue to try to work through some of the frustrations with the school. And I personally apologize to the teachers and staff. We're working really, really hard to get this done. And so I wanted to give the board an update. I know that was something that was brought to you. One other issue that I'm hearing about as I'm going and speaking with teachers is a substitute. And we're having a substitute shortage in our district. One of the great things about speaking with teachers every day is you know what's going on. And it's been very clear to me that we have some work to do there. So we're working with staff to develop a plan, a multifaceted plan on how we can make sure that we have our more classes covered on a day-to-day basis. And so I don't think this is just a Boulder Valley issue. I think this may be a Front Range issue, a Colorado issue. But we're going to do what the best we can to get ahead of this. And so you'll be hearing from me over the course of the next couple of weeks on what we're doing to try to make sure that we're having substitute coverage in our classes at a higher rate. And that's all for my update.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Thank you for your comments. Are there any questions for Dr. Anderson? All right, hearing none, we'll proceed to the next item on our agenda, which is public hearing and public participation. Thank you. The board recognizes the value of public comment on issues related to the operation of schools. To ensure that our meeting is conducted in an orderly manner, we ask that persons who address the board confine your comments to matters that are germane to the business of the school district. Speakers on agenda items will be heard first, followed by those speaking to non-agenda items. Limit your presentation to 2 minutes. If we go over the first hour, which I don't think we'll do tonight, public comment will continue at the end of the meeting. Recognize that students often attend or view our meetings. Speakers' remarks should therefore be suitable for an audience that includes kindergarten through 12th grade students. The board vice president may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement that is unrelated to the business of the district or inappropriate for K-12 students. There's a lighting system on the podium starting at green when your 2 minutes starts, turning to yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining, and turning to red at the end. When the light turns red, please wrap up your comments so that the board can hear from the maximum number of speakers. Speaking to agenda items, we have one public participant, Maxine Most. Is she here? Welcome.
Okay, last time I was here, these lights didn't work, so, and I'm not seeing anything lit, so.
Laura's working on the lights.
Okay. I don't see any lights. I just cut me off if I talk too long. So I want to talk about open enrollment, and I know I only have 2 minutes, and I sent you guys all a letter which had a lot of detail in it, but I did want this to go on the record. So I really think that BVSD's current open enrollment processes and policies don't really support the district equity objectives, which I'm so glad you guys are addressing. And I think in some cases, actually, open enrollment policies and processes actually exacerbate inequity. And there's 3 areas I just wanted to touch on tonight. One is around lack of transparency, and I had a really nice discussion today with Leslie Stafford about that. Basically, open enrollment's kind of a black hole. There is some data, it's hard to find, it's not easily accessible. It would be great if as a community we understood open enrollment more specifically, like how many kids from school X open enrolled to school Y, how many of those kids get in, how many of those kids get in with privileges, whether those are, or prioritization, whether that's staff prioritization or sibling prioritization, just so that as a community we can actually have a coherent discussion about the policies because we actually know what they are and how they're being implemented. So I think transparency is really important, so I'd really like to see that data. Along those lines, it would be great if the board and our new superintendent would make a statement about the open enrollment issues last year with high school open enrollment, which created a lot of anguish for a lot of people, particularly in East County. So it'd be great if we just could have some kind of public statement around that, maybe when the new open enrollment period starts, about sort of what happened, why it happened, how we're moving forward. 2 more quick issues. One is I think it's really important to start thinking about open enrollment as a limited resource. It used to be you could go to any high school you wanted to in Boulder County. There was room for everybody. Now there isn't, and so it creates a lot of stress. So one of the things that I think would be interesting to consider is once you get an open enrollment, whether it's in kindergarten or whether it's in 6th grade, that going forward, if you successfully open enroll, that means you go to the back of the line next time. That would spread that resource more effectively for everybody. Thank you. There's more information, in the letter that I presented, but I really appreciate the fact that you guys are thinking about this, considering it, and I think going forward it would be great to have the data to broaden the discussion so everybody can engage and we can really come up with a policy that works for everybody in the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura, the light's working now? It looks like it. Next, we have Andrea Blake, who's been given 2 minutes from Laura Corbin. Is that right?
I am back again to address the relentless bullying of my daughter at Aspen Creek. Despite having been told that there is a no-tolerance policy for bullying, school administrators identified what was happening to my daughter as just that, bullying, last spring. They not only tolerated it, but then enabled that for months. My child with a disability was unable to attend school for 4 weeks and was greatly affected by all she went through. I can't speak for the other student, but I think it would be fair to say that Aspen Creek administrators failed her as well. Now, something that could have been handled easily in the beginning has possibly left 2 young people permanently impacted. There has been some resolution in our situation since I last spoke. I had hoped that this resolution would have come from my daughter's school or from the district, but sadly that is not the case. Instead, the protection of my daughter came from not 1, but 2 different judges who saw the severity of the situation and issued protection orders. I am hopeful that the worst of this is behind us and my daughter can begin to mend and enjoy school once again. I would like to mention to the board that through everything we have had to endure, there have been some people that have really stepped up. Mrs. Barnett is my youngest daughter's 4th grade teacher at Aspen Creek. To say that Mrs. Barnett is a great teacher would be a huge understatement. Not only does she have an amazing ability to reach and connect with her students, but safety has always been her #1 priority. And she has gone above and beyond to keep my child physically and emotionally safe through this difficult time. This made everything we're going through just a little bit easier, and I am grateful for her dedication. I would also like to say the same for the many 8th grade teachers that did the same for my older daughter. After missing 4 weeks of school, they welcomed my daughter back with open arms. They have also gone above and beyond to help ease her back into the school routine. The efforts of Mrs. Keith, Mrs. Haug, Mrs. Turner, Miss King, Mrs. Faulkner, Mr. Berg, and Mr. Flynn are greatly appreciated. Although our situation has an outcome where now my daughter can remain at her school safely, that is not always the case and is often not. I strongly urge BVSD to make the necessary changes in their handling of bully situations. My daughter is not the first to go through this, and nor will she be the last.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Shane Brown, who has been given 2 minutes by Lindsay Terry.
Good evening, Superintendent Anderson, members of the board. Wanted to say thank you first. Wanted to say thank you to Dr. Anderson for your visit last week to Eisenhower and for your words tonight. Those words, your focus and energy on this means a lot personally to me. And as I said, I know a lot of our staff watch these board meetings, and knowing that you're engaged is very important. And I'd like to give a personal thank you to Donna Myers for your tour, coming and touring the school last week. I know your visit meant a lot. I talked to Michelle Taboda, who is our office administrator, within a couple minutes after you'd left, and I could hear the smile on her face through the phone. So that type of engagement, we really appreciate it. And the photos you shared with the rest of the board, I think speak volumes as far as what we're looking at. Sure, there's some big items, right? There's the sound barriers, there's the bathrooms, there's the bookshelves, but it's the finishing details that are the most important, or not most important, the things that we could be doing right now that don't need long lead materials that we could be doing right now that we're not. But I also want to say a big thank you to Kaki Zeeb and to Dave Egan for their engagement. From a parent point of view, the weekly status emails that Kaki sends out are very informative, and I really appreciate those. From an Eisenhower staff point of view, the level of engagement from Kaki has been much appreciated and great. I know I spoke with Lisa Dings about it last week and this week, and she is very happy with how she's been able to work with Kaki, and that's a big change from what we had before. And so thank you to Kaki. She is at Eisenhower, and she's making a difference for us. Dave Egan, he's met by grade level with the teachers, right? We have pods, and so he's met by grade level with the teachers to go over what is in their specific needs. He's organized the punch list, so he is engaged, and we really appreciate that. The teachers spoke of how much they appreciated those meetings. So things are improving. We're on the communication side, on the organizational side, and we have good engagement, but there's still almost nobody there in the evenings, from a worker's standpoint, and progress is happening very slowly. At the current rate of progress, I don't see how we can finish in October. Maybe, and we're talking about finishing with the things that don't have long lead items, right? We're talking about the finishing items. We're not talking about the bathrooms or the Michelle's desk, right, or the wall, the sound barriers, the bookshelves. Those have order problems, but there's other things that need to be done that could be done today. And we still have concerns about the quality of work. We have baseboard molding that was put on is already coming off, cork boards being installed without trim, right? The school looks junky. We talk about equity. We're flanked by 2 schools that got new buildings in the bond, and we have to compete against those schools in open enrollment. We need to have the finishing done, and so that's where our request is that we help Rob Price get the staff in the building that he needs to do the work. He's got his team there, but we don't have personnel for him to swing the hammers, to do the electrical work. That's the next big challenge. And we look forward to getting some help for his team there and for getting us through this and getting our school looking good again. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Joe Minnick, who's been given 2 minutes by Mark Gelband. The other way around? Okay. We have Mark Gelband, who's been given 2 minutes by Joe Minnick.
I'm just going to scoot this over if y'all don't mind. So I'm also here today to support Miss Andrea Blake and talk to the board about bullying. And this is the first time I've spoken in front of the board of Boulder Valley School District, and in some ways I'm embarrassed that this is the first time that I'm here. I was fortunate enough to have 3 kids go through the Boulder Valley School District, 2 of which have gone on to college, one who's currently a senior at Boulder High School, all of whom have had varying experiences, but nothing to the degree that Miss Blake and her daughter have experienced. So I'm here today really representing myself and other parents in the district and as a volunteer for the Bullying Recovery Resource Center. The director of the center is here tonight, Tom Alberg, and I also think it's shameful that you won't let him speak directly to the board or that you have to be a Boulder Valley resident to speak on such a serious issue, especially in light of the degradation of civility just in our public discourse nationally. So I've volunteered to speak for Andrea and her daughter, to protect a minor, and I'm not going to use her first name tonight, but she's a disabled 13-year-old girl at Aspen Creek. She has been relentlessly bullied for way too long now, and the school and the school district has failed to stop it. As she is an IEP student, in the district, she's covered under the Department of Education Civil Rights Enforcement. The Office of Civil Rights in 2010 issued the following statement: any appropriate steps to end the harassment should not penalize the student who was harassed. After Andrea and her daughter reported multiple bullying events at Aspen Creek, this board and BVSD failed to protect her. BVSD implemented its first safety plan, and it failed 9 out of 9 days. BVS responded to this failed safety plan by adding a paraprofessional, which actually only hurt even more because it further ostracized her daughter. When Andrea stated to the school that you can't put a paraprofessional on her as that would stigmatize her further or penalize her more and result in more social bullying, BVSD refused to remove the paraprofessional. This penalized a disabled student that was being harassed. Therefore, Andrea wouldn't allow her daughters to attend school as only failed safety plans or safety plans that violated her civil rights had been proposed. In retaliation, BVSD marked her daughter as unexcused for every missed day since then. Finally, last week, with the help of the Bullying Recovery Resource Center and attorney Igor Rakin, Andrea was able to get a restraining order against the bully and have the courts do for her what this board, the school district, and the school failed to do for her. It's shameful that she had to go to the courts to get the protection that she needed. And all of you should be ashamed of yourselves that she needed to go that far in order to do it. BVSD has since transferred the bully to another school, but that doesn't change that their initial response was inept at best and violated a 13-year-old disabled girl's civil rights. We will be assisting Andrea Blake in filing a civil rights complaint with the Colorado Department of Education and continuing to refer this to our attorney, Igor Rakin. I suggest the board review its inadequate and outdated bullying policies and procedures. In addition to all the civil rights violations, the school never accounted for, can I please finish? Thank you. For very feasible retaliation or provided the bullied girl protection from it. Failing to protect a bullied child from retaliation gives the impression to all of BVSD that all BVSD really doesn't want its students to report bullying. Currently, the school's investigations will out the bullied students as a tattletale and provides little to no protection for the inevitable retaliation by the bully. Our hope is that BVSD revises its ineffective bullying policies and procedures so that we won't be back here again advocating for another bullied child. Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me tonight.
Thank you. That concludes our public participation for the evening. We appreciate hearing from all of our speakers this evening. We'll now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is board communication. Board members, who would like to begin? Don't all rush to the head of the line. Okay, Kitty?
I want to thank everybody who spoke today. And about open enrollment, I shared some of the same concerns that Ms. Most had, that it seemed like there were so many preferences for kids whose parents work there, or kids whose siblings went there, or if it's a charter school, kids of anybody who's ever served on the board. And I do have concerns about the inequity of that. And the other thing I struggle with is if we do encourage more kids, especially children living in poverty, to open enroll, how are they going to get their kids to the school? And that's another big piece, because we don't provide transportation when someone open enrolls. And I think that is something that stands in the way of a lot of kids being able to open enroll. That's all I had to say about that.
Donna?
Thank you, Maxine, for your letter. It was enlightening, I think, for all of us, but what I really appreciated is that you also added recommendations, and I think we'll look into those. I mean, our staff will, as well as the board members. Andrea and Mark, thank you for coming forward and talking to us about the situation. I watched at someone's request a TED Talk on Maslow's basic needs, which we're all aware of in the educational field, and one of them is safety and security. And I can tell you that even as it applies to Eisenhower, I want a secure and safe environment for all kids, and I appreciate you bringing your concerns to us again. And then Shane, we just finished a work session where we were reminded that staff sometimes needs, and this goes to you too, Andrea, sometimes staff, it's not the money that they want, but sometimes an acknowledgement, and I really liked hearing the people that you thanked, that it's a whole crew working to help your daughter, Andrea, and working to get Eisenhower on the right track. So we're going to press forward with both issues. Thanks.
Sam?
That's well said, Donna, and thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. We're always interested in lessons learned, whether it's a building project or the unfortunate consequences of bullying, so thank you. I did want to just comment on something that is not on our agenda, but it was in our inbox this week. These were the reports Bill sent to us about fundraising at our individual schools, and those reports are public for anybody who's interested. But on one hand, it's great that our parents and our school communities are able to give generously to fund the schools their children attend. But when we have elementary schools outraising other elementary schools 10 or 20 times, we have an equity problem there. And I don't think policy KH is quite getting us where we need to be. So perhaps at agenda setting later in the meeting, I'll bring up that as a topic for further review.
Richard or Shelley? Tina, you have anything for board comment?
No, but thanks for checking in.
I'll just add two things. I attended the equity conference, as you said, Rob, with Richard, and hats off to Sam and all of the staff for a very well-run conference. I wasn't able to go to the first one, but I really appreciated the second one, how we had it sat at tables as kind of symbolic of it's time to start moving into an action phase of the equity conference. And I sat with a group of parents and administrators and teachers and learned a whole lot sitting there listening. I had to try to invoke the Vegas rules because sitting there as a board member, I wanted people to feel comfortable in talking about concerns and issues without feeling like it was going to come straight back to the board. But it was great, and it was fun to see you, Rob, kind of enroll as superintendent and parent, hopping up and down, and the different ice-breaking activities that we had, and the way the day was structured was really, really positive. So I look forward to seeing what our next steps are, and thank you for I know there's a lot of effort that went into that, so thanks to Sam and her staff for doing such a great job. And then last night, I was at the parity meeting, and I'm going to have a hard time not calling you Senior Rob after last night. But it was a great meeting. I appreciated staff being there and listening, and the meeting went really long because we were able to allow every parent the opportunity to express kind of their issues and concerns and hopes and dreams for their children. And so it was a really nice meeting, and I look forward to seeing what the follow-up is to that, and look forward to more meetings like that. I really like those meetings. So thank you, Senior Rob, for being there, and for your staff for being there as well. So I think that's all we have, unless there's anything else on board comment. Richard?
I do want to say something. And Andrea, as an individual board member, I do want to offer my apologies as one person on this board. I do think that we need to start looking a little bit more closely at our bullying policy and see what we can do to help alleviate issues just like the one that you were involved in. I do feel a little bit frustrated right now, and again, my apologies.
Anyone else? Okay, so the next item is an information item. Dr. Senior Rob, if you want to do the introduction.
I'd like to welcome Jonathan Dings up to the podium to discuss with the board and the public our Unified Improvement Plan strategies. And Jonathan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Members of the board, Dr. Anderson will walk briefly through the improvement plan strategies. I'll do that first here by on these particular slides, looking at providing you an overview. We're going to talk about the planning process a bit, review the district performance at a very high level as context, and then talk about three particular strategies meant to address root causes. We'll talk about multi-tiered systems of support, data-based problem solving, and decision-making as well as literacy instructional practices. On this slide, though, I have left this idea of assessment participation up there, in that we need to encourage that still in order to make sure we're getting maximum data and getting the best of the value that we can out of the effort that is put forth by so many of our students. At the end, we'll have time for questions also. So focusing on the improvement planning process, one of the things we do, first off, are to identify patterns in data. That we've done. We talked a bit about those at the August 28th meeting. Within those patterns, we would identify some of them as being problematic and particularly worthy of our attention in for the further steps, particularly around identifying root causes for problematic patterns that we would be focused on. We then develop strategies to attempt to address those root causes, and those being things we've done by and large for this year and are talking about now. This work is documented in an improvement plan that would be brought for your formal approval, and that we need to turn into the Colorado Department of Education by the middle of April. I would add that we're thinking about this year's activity. There will be activity to, of course, propose a budget for next year, and that will. And that's not as much reflected in the particular strategies we're talking about tonight, which are the ones that schools are already engaged in. So as our context for the district, we have high growth and high achievement, high post-secondary outcomes. As a consequence of that, we are accredited with distinction, which is CCD's highest plan type. Some of our schools are not given the highest rating that they can have. So we recognize that there are some actions that will be taken in those cases, including one of which will be brought here for your review with the turnaround plan. When we look at the patterns we see overall, right, it's worth mentioning our increased participation, both to thank people for their efforts to participate. We really appreciate that, but also to note that means for us that in many ways 2018 is a new baseline year. Much of the patterns we see do continue. The high achievement that we've seen over time is there, and we've also seen strong growth at elementary and high school grades. However, the pattern of significant growth gaps for groups of students, particularly those served in special education who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, who are emerging bilinguals, or who are Latino, those are patterns that we've seen over time in a way that is both persistent and problematic. Looking at a picture of this performance right here, happening to choose English language arts, and showing the 2017-18 comparison, just focusing on the blue dots to look at 2018, really our new baseline year. Looking at this, we can think of the gap in terms of the difference between performance by students in a group and performance overall in terms of percent meet and exceeds. There are other ways we can measure these gaps too, but it's worth looking at this one in terms of the magnitude of what we're talking about. Now, as we think about root causes, we've done a significant amount of work in the past. And I would point out here, these are root causes you've seen previously in plans. Focus particularly on our lack of systematic language and literacy instruction and the limited amount of intervention. We've also talked about ways in which data are and aren't used, and lack of adequate social, emotional learning strategies, and some questions about how we apply these strategies, the best strategies instructionally to support emerging bilingual students. Based on these root causes and past implementation of our plans, the fundamental work that we've been doing recently and are doing this year to address these root causes is around the multi-tiered system of supports. This graphic, borrowed from the Colorado Department of Education's website, poses this model in terms of the layered continuum of supports, which focuses on the instruction students receive in the classroom, as well as what they receive in interventions. All practices are meant to be evidence-based and planned in a team-driven activity that includes partnership work and has as its core, at least one part of it, database problem solving and decision making. Some of the work we're doing involves this multi-tiered systems of support system overall. At the secondary level, based on implementation from past year, that this year's implementation involved focusing on getting functional student support teams and improving our documentation of needs, strengths, and interventions for individual students. At all of our schools, we're focused on a social emotional learning strategy that is picked by each school and is meant to foster school connectedness and our positive relationships in a way that will support all students. The database problem solving and decision making continues some past work at the elementary level around data cycles and focused problem solving. There is work being done at the secondary level in particular, but also at the elementary level for school teams to use data to look at the effectiveness of the practices provided for all students. In addition, we are using data to help reduce over-identification of particularly emerging bilingual and Latino students for special education. In all this work, our aim really is to use data to impact students' success. Finally, as a last slide, but with a fair amount of content, at the secondary level, literacy instructional practices this year are focused on cross-content reading strategies. There are two chosen for each middle or high school. Middles and highs aren't working on all the same ones, and then schools can pick one on top of that. What we have too at the middle level is further implementation of the READ Act for a cohort of students that are now in grades 7, so grades 6 and 7 now have full implementation of this. In addition, at the elementary level, schools are focused on implementing the BVSD instructional framework and making data-informed instructional decisions and good interventions based on that. Finally, and not least of all, as you know, there are new elementary literacy materials that include explicit phonics instruction. Having new materials is an incredibly big deal for elementary teachers and a main focus of work this year. I stand ready to answer any of your questions.
Richard?
Jonathan, you mentioned that this is a persistent problem, especially around the literacy gaps that we have and reading and writing gaps probably between Latinos or ELLs or free and reduced lunch kids. And then when I look at the graph that you gave us, I see that Latino students are at 30%. Is that reading proficiency?
Right, that's the
Or is that the achievement
language
gap, or
arts, meeting or exceeding state expectations.
ELA achievement participation?
Yep.
30% Latino?
That's correct.
And then a little bit lower, maybe 25% free and reduced lunch, something around that. And then a little bit more than 21% maybe around the ELLs. That's the English language learners.
That's correct.
And the majority of the English language learners are Spanish speakers, probably.
That's correct.
And if you look at the free and reduced lunch English language learners and maybe Latino, they could all be probably in one group, maybe.
There's a good deal of overlap
Uh-huh.
with most English
So,
language learners who speak
so when you say
Spanish.
persistent, could we also maybe say that it's even egregious as it relates to this opportunity or achievement gap that's been around forever? It's not nothing new, right? I mean, we've done this for how long? I guess, Jonathan, excuse me, I'm just a little bit frustrated and a little bit angry at the moment that we have not been able to do a whole lot with our achievement or opportunities as it relates to Latino students or English language learners for a long time. And what, and I mentioned, I saw that some of your strategies that you have in there, which are good. Do you think that maybe we do have answers already that we can start implementing in our district to start seeing some of this achievement or opportunity gaps disappear?
I would say we're off to a good start. Our phonics materials, our literacy materials is a good start as we think about making sure that all students are prepared to read and doing so by third grade. It's something that I'm looking at in my 100-day plan. It's certainly a priority. And Richard, you have a right to be frustrated. This is a persistent issue, and I think that as we move forward as a district, we have the talent, resources, and will to make a difference in this area. And it's something that I'm focused on and our team is focused on. And as we move forward and evaluate the success effect in our strategic plan and think about new and different strategies that we can use, and how do we do those consistently and drive resources to the needs of the problem, my hope is that over time that this gap continues to narrow until it's closed. And that would be my hope. But you have every right to be frustrated.
Shelley and then Donna.
Yeah, I just have a quick follow-up question to what Richard is saying. You, in your presentation, you cite limited application of instructional policies to support ELL students as one root cause of the achievement gap. And that honestly doesn't mean much to me. Can you explain what that is saying? Limited application of instructional policies, and how might we be addressing that to move the mark for ELL kids?
So this idea about limited application of instructional strategies is more around the question of what goes on in the classroom than the regular education classroom. And in this, which you might, if we think back to when we had Ed Northwest come in and do a sort of audit, might be too big of a word, but they did do some observation of multiple classrooms. They did raise some questions about how consistently and how effectively strategies were in place to support English learners. So we've borrowed from that evidence and this sense of folks in schools about areas that we would need to focus on. The part of the challenge of the root cause work, right, is to name things that are within one's own control. Not to say we're not getting enough money to do something or that, but to really focus on what can be done. I think there is significant room to gain in application of strategies to serve English learners better. That would include things like beginning lessons by activating the background knowledge more explicitly. Many teachers do this very, very well, but it isn't a practice we would see in all classrooms. There are practices around language objectives that involve different modes of speaking. There are practices involving having students to talk in groups more to ensure that all students are speaking and around academic content. Those are some of the kind of things that we say when we talk about this.
That's helpful. I just have one other question about the elementary literacy materials, because I'm pretty excited about seeing, what foundations might do in this new emphasis on phonics. But my understanding was that wasn't really for ELL kids, that program isn't designed for ELL kids. So what are they getting that will help them from a phonics perspective?
I don't have a good answer to that. I would say that one of the things we've asked schools to do is look at what are best practices around the new materials.
If I may. You're doing an excellent job, Dr. Dings. So just to add to that, so the Foundations doesn't offer instruction in Spanish, but many of our English language learners are receiving their instruction in English. They're receiving English language development services. And so they're getting instruction in English through Wilson Foundations in kindergarten. At our dual language schools, we have implemented a different phonics program called Estrellita, which is developed and delivered in Spanish.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any more, Shelley? Donna?
Hey, thank you. A good presentation. I appreciate all the work that goes into getting this information to us. One of the things I see, having recently taught in the district, both the ELL group and the SPED group, is sometimes nothing new under the sun, but kind of renamed. And it's frustrating because MTSS, we used to have the 3 tiers that we looked at and which level. So as I was looking at the slides, I thought, do we have specific measures and metrics, target goals, SMART goals that I know in my own classrooms I did, and I used Ames Web when we all bucked against using it and we didn't want to get into using that program because it would make us maybe too accountable. and then once we realized how we could set these small little steps and show students their progress, that was a strategic plan that was really effective. So my question is, will teachers be required to have specific goals such as a student will have X by such and such date? As we saw from the READAC results, that we still have a huge problem. And this isn't just our district, it's nationwide. And I would like to see data from districts that are starting to close that gap and what we can learn from them as well. So these are more comments than just specific questions, but I did, when I went into Eisenhower, I was frustrated to see some of our new materials in phonics having to be on the floor and kind of pushed aside because they don't have their shelves yet. So I realize it's a slow process that everybody has to get into it, even from Ames Web. The only question I would have is, as far as this strategic plan and the improvements go, what would you say is the biggest new development or change?
Right. So I would say the biggest change at the elementary level is having new materials. At the high school level, it's hard to say whether it's actually strategies that are being done. The principals are working in these cross content reading strategies, one of which is called reciprocal teaching, right? And that sort of tied with the level of implementation this year of MTSS, as far as the way that teams work and the improved documentation and the progress monitoring that goes along with that, right? Once you've identified a student in a team as someone who you need to identify more supports for, how do you document that? That's the piece. So I would say that those probably at the secondary and elementary are the biggest strategies.
Richard?
Just one more question, John, and thanks a lot for the presentation, by the way. We have 2 dual language immersion schools. One is a 90-10, the other one is a 50-50. And of the 2 dual language immersion schools, if you were to look at the demographics, I guess what I'm trying to say is, how many, in terms of this 30% or the demographic that we have here, of the 30 Latino in terms of the ELL achievement versus participation. The 30% Latino ELA achievement versus participation. But how many would be in those particular schools that are that, of all the Latino students enrolled at the elementary level? Would it be 30%, 40%? How many?
So in round numbers, it's about 100 at a grade level, maybe a little bit more, 110. And BVSD overall is, again, in round numbers, about 20% Latino. So to rough that out, about a quarter of our Latino students at the elementary level would be in the 3 programs, but you only asked about a couple, so.
Right, and I guess my question would be, how are they doing as it relates to reading achievement, writing, math, et cetera?
To clarify, I think what you're asking is, of our Latino students that are meeting or exceeding grade level, what percentage of the 30% are participating in one of our dual immersion or bilingual programs?
Yeah, thank you. That's, yeah.
Right, so we can get that, we can pull that up and get that for you and share that with the entire board.
Tina, I was coming to you. Go ahead.
So first, I just wanted to thank Jonathan and the staff for putting a renewed emphasis on the UIP. And I feel like that's been something that we haven't spent as much time on. And I understand the reason was the sort of replacement by the strategic plan, and I assume it will be aligned. But I know this will also help with some of the work with DAC. And so I look forward to this process. The other thing is I just want to make sure that that the staff knows that I will support whatever it takes to help with these gaps. And so if there are hard decisions and, you know, resource allocation, that's something I'm really open to. And I hope that we can have those discussions even if they're challenging and even if it's something new that we have to do to change the direction we've been going in since I've been on the board. That's it.
Thanks, Tina. I have a couple questions. Kind of consistent with what Tina said. On your slide, you say we'll have an improvement plan by mid-April. I was hoping we could get some more specifics as to what that timing would look like and how that's going to fold into our budget planning in case there's specific budget requests. So I think it would be helpful if we could have, at some point, some more specificity about when we would expect budgetary requests and then when we'd get the UIP back.
So this is, to clarify, Jonathan, that's the last date that we can submit to the state, is
Exactly
the UIP.
right.
And so we may be able to do that earlier,
We can
but the
absolutely do
budget
that
would be aligned to the next UIP and strategic plan. And so this, what you saw today, once we have that finalized and submitted, that's the last time you can submit it to the state. It's kind of a weird timing, but we could submit it earlier than that. So what you're asking for as we go into the budget process is how does our UIP for 1920 align to the budget process? Am I hearing that correctly?
And also timeline for when we can see the draft UIP, because in the past, we've seen the UIP after it's been submitted. So I think it would be helpful to get it before it's submitted, so.
Definitely, we can do that.
And then I share Donna's frustration that sometimes it feels like we just add new initials to something that's not really changing anything. And when I look at our performance of our special ed students, they actually are our lowest performing students. So I share Richard's frustration, but on the special education side, because I think that performance is really, really substandard for what we can be doing. And I get the challenges, but I also feel like whatever strategies you can help us with, Dr. Anderson, in figuring out how we close that achievement gap for our special ed students, I'll look forward to hearing that. And then I was hoping for a little more information on the what we're doing on social emotional learning. It sounds like it's school-specific, but it doesn't feel like there's much consistency there. So what does that look like for implementing social emotional learning to help close these gaps? If we could get a little bit on that.
We can certainly provide an overview of everything we're doing with social emotional learning and the choices that we're providing for schools, and we can include that in our weekly update to you.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Dings.
Thank you.
Our next information item is revised regulation JECC-R, open enrollment procedures and information. Dr. Anderson?
And so I've asked Leslie Stafford to come up and answer any questions you may have. Board, as you know, any changes to regulations, superintendent regulations per board policy BG have to come to the board for information. And so we shared that information for you, did some cleanup to this regulation, and Leslie is here to answer any questions you may have.
And I did want to propose one small additional change based on some feedback we got from Shelley Benford this afternoon. At the bottom of page 3 under the selection process, and I apologize, I realize this doesn't have page numbers, we'll add those as well. But we'd like to add some clarity under the first preference language. So if you see that there, I propose that we remove the second sentence there about jeopardizing the student's space. I think that makes it actually a little more confusing. And instead, the first preference would read, in-district students who move out of their district-designated neighborhood school attendance area, but who remain in the district and wish to remain at the school the student is currently attending. I think that makes it more clear that we're really talking about in-district students who are just moving within the district. Students who move out of the district are recognized in the sixth preference. So including that other small change, which is not changing the preference, but just clarifying the language, this regulation would go into effect November 9th, and the open enrollment window would run November 9th through January 9th. So with that, I'll take any other questions that you have.
Board members? Okay, Tina?
On that same page, Leslie, we have the sibling preferences where out-of-district siblings get preference over any in-district student. And has that always been the case?
As long as I can remember, yes.
Okay, I'm a little uncomfortable with that, and I think it relates a little bit to how much our in-district, our students are paying in the mill and the bond. And I don't like it to be just a money issue, but I think one of Maxine's most comments was about how open enrollment has become a scarcity. And it might be time to rethink whether out-of-district siblings would get preference over just an average BVSD student. I think, and I'm open, I would like to hear the thoughts of other board members about that. And the other piece is that I think we've asked our charter schools to consider not having sort of these legacy preferences, but that's, I just want to make a comment that that's the business of the charter school, that our school board does not have any kind of influence on the open enrollment preferences set by charter schools. So that's that. That's all I've got.
Thanks, Tina. Other board members? Sam? Then Kitty?
Does this do anything to tighten up the folks who game the system by establishing what are really not primary residences, et cetera?
This regulation does not address that, but we will be getting a principal group together to talk about that. As Tina mentioned and Maxine most, it is becoming a scarce resource, and so we do understand and know that there are ways to game the system, and so I've talked with particularly some secondary principals, and we're going to look at what we can do to help curb that.
And my only other question is, could you remind everybody how we're going to communicate these changes to the community?
Sure. The open enrollment window will start November 9th, and then usually a couple weeks before that, so very soon here, we'll be sending an email out to all of our family members, letting them know that the open enrollment window is opening, and also any of the small changes we've made in the regulation, and letting them know that the swap we ran last year as a pilot is not going to run this year. And so that'll all be included in a communication to all of our families.
Yeah, I have a question, and it's under the information regarding special programs. It's the second bullet. And it says enrollment and participation in any school sports or activities by new students to the district is conditional on the new school performing a safe schools check, the results of which may be grounds for denial of admission under Colorado law. What is that safe schools check? And what does it have to do with
I'm gonna
athletics
defer
and
to Mike Wilcox on this.
activities?
This is new and required by state statute, but I don't think it all, come on up, Mike, yeah.
Hi, good evening. I'm Mike Wilcox, Director for Student Enrollment. The Safe Schools Addendum was put into effect probably about 6 years ago that tries to enforce that receiving school make sure that the student is safe as they come into the school by checking with the sending school district. So every administrator, and they can delegate to staff within the school, needs to check on that incoming student and say, were there any sort of safety plans? What issues did the student have? So that we, the receiving school, know exactly what's going on.
And then the follow-up to that is, what does that have to do with athletics and activities?
I think that that is separate, and I would defer to potentially an athletic director to spell that out. But sometimes, as I am aware of a conflict potentially, is that school sports and practices happen during the summer as teams are starting to coalesce. And that, in essence, we can't have a student showing up for practice without enrollment, and you can't have enrollment without a safe schools check being done.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That's Mike Wilcox, our Director of Enrollment. Thank you, Mike.
Shelley? Okay,
Yeah.
Kitty?
I just had one more question, is that why is El Dorado K-8 listed as being in Louisville?
I will double check that. Thank you.
Anything else, Kitty? No. Okay, Shelley?
Yeah, so I'm just going to preference 2, Leslie, about sibling preferences, to Tina's point. Aren't we really saying a sibling can come in if their brother or sister is already attending that school and will be the following year?
Yes.
So now that we've moved the out-of-district preference to 6th, or the last preference, isn't this just a grandfathering situation? Because at some point, these kids are not going to be in the schools to start with, and therefore the sibling preference really isn't going to be an issue once they move through that school.
Right. Well, we haven't changed anything. We clarified the language, but the outer district has always been number 6 for the currents moving outside of the boundaries.
Oh, okay. I
So
thought
think
we
that stays
changed
the
that a
same.
little bit.
But we're just clarifying the language, but we're not making any changes to the preferences themselves.
Okay. So really, if there's a sibling in, that's because their brother or sister got in on the 6th preference.
Or
In the
maybe an
past.
employee, or maybe they used to live in the district. There's probably a variety of circumstances.
Mhm. Okay.
Anything else, Shelley? Donna?
Okay, just a quick question, because I'm sure if someone may have the same question, and since you talked to Maxine, I just am bringing it up, so if anybody has this question, you can answer it. I have a hard time comprehending, I see all the first preference all the way down to the 6th. Is there this algorithm that's going on and a checklist that parents answer, and then it goes into the system? And
Yes.
Okay.
It's all being done electronically. It's an online process, and then it runs through Infinite Campus runs our lottery, and Mike, you can come correct me if I do this wrong, but, and then those are all automatically generate and run through the lottery system. And we run through in-district employee preferences and sibling preferences in our first, second, and third choices. That's the first lottery, and the second is then out-of-district students. Would you add anything to that, Mike, or?
That's absolutely right. So every parent application is vetted by our staff, and we're verifying whether siblings attend, whether you might be a student of a board of a director at a charter. And we make sure all those preferences are in play, and then the lottery, in essence, is sorting based on those preferences and the random number that's assigned upon parent submittal.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? So as I understand it, then this is the process that will be in place, starting with the open enrollment November 9th.
Correct.
So everybody understands that? Okay,
Great,
thank you. Are we okay to move on to action items, board? Okay. The next item on our agenda is action items and consent grouping, and I'll read them off, including 7.1 personnel items, 7.2 approval of minutes, September 25th, 2018 special meeting, 7.3 approval of minutes, September 25th, 2018 regular meeting, approval of service agreement for day program services, 7.5 citizens bond oversight committee membership, 7.6 proposed 19, 20, and 2021 academic calendars, 7.7 ratification of negotiated agreement between Boulder Valley School District and the Boulder Valley Para Educators Association, 7.8 grant Columbine and Pioneer Elementary Schools, bullying prevention and education, Colorado Department of Education. Are there any items board members would like to pull from the consent grouping? Hearing none, we need to begin the discussion. We need a motion to approve the remaining items on the consent agenda, and then we can have the question. Or do you want to ask the question before? You okay with that, Donna? Okay. So moved. Motion from Kitty? Second from Richard? Okay, we'll open it up for questions. So Donna?
Just a question I want to throw out there on the 7.7 negotiated agreement. Were these increased costs for COLA and steps lanes included in this year's budget?
Mike, do you want to come up and answer that?
This agreement was negotiated last year. We didn't get it ratified because the paras leave for the summer, so we didn't get it ratified till this fall. So it's last year's budget, not this coming up year's budget. Okay.
Any other discussion on the consent agenda items? Sam?
7.6, the calendars. Did this come to us before it ended up on consent, and did I miss it, or is it, this just went straight to consent?
I don't remember seeing it, but I,
Okay. Well, I've just expressed my disappointment that we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but I'll honor the process and vote for it. I would just remark that August 14th is very early to start a school year, seems to me, and I won't be on the board, but I hope the board would, when this comes around again, be more actively engaged and consider moving the start date much later into the year. You know, I would have liked to have discussed, you know, starting after Labor Day. And I know we're moving towards air conditioning all our buildings, but we're at risk starting on August 14th, certainly in 2019, with the buildings that lack that. And even if we have air conditioning, of course, we're more inclined to spend energy costs during that hot time in August, and the later it gets in the year, the less we may have to spend. And there's a lot of other reasons, I think, to look at moving the start later. We did talk about this in depth several years ago as a board, and there wasn't will to go there. But I just hope the board would look at talking about it again, even though I will be a yes vote, because here we are.
Shelley?
Yeah, I just want to second Sam's sentiments. The last time we talked about the calendar, we had a pretty long discussion about it, and there was a lot of debate, a lot of community input. So I was surprised to see this on the consent agenda too. And I just feel like one of the reasons we've talked about moving the start date back was definitely around the heat issues, and those aren't, you know, they're not going away right now. So I do hope the next time this comes up that the board will consider that. Oh, and I want to say that just while I have the mic here, I want to say that I think those are two great choices for CBOC. So good job, Allison and Celeste. I think they'll be great additions. And I just had a quick question about the request for the grant for the bullying program. It says in the justification that the program is reducing bullying, but I'm just wondering how we measure that. What metrics do we use to say that a program is working like that? So that's it.
Dr. Anderson?
So a couple things. As we speak to the calendar, I thought that we had shared that with you all in our weekly communications. And we are, as we went through the process, lots of engagement. Actually, board policy kind of dictates what our guiding principles are around calendar development, which were followed. And so I apologize if you felt like that should have come in a different way. We thought we had communicated that. In regards to the Columbine and Pioneer, the grant in regards to how the measurement is, I don't have that information in front of me. I can get that to you. And if you want to, if you support this, we'll make sure we get this for you.
Tina?
Also on the calendar issue, I would just be interested to know how our student contact days compared with some of our peer districts that we generally measure against.
Okay, anything else, Tina?
No, that's it, thank you.
Sure. Kitty?
Yeah, so I was concerned about the year, I can't remember if it's this year or next year, where we're starting the second week in August, and it looks like it's counting back from Memorial Day. Is that how it's determined when to start?
There's several guiding principles, and I'd ask Robin Fernandez, who led this up for us, to come to the podium to answer any additional questions and correct me if I get this incorrect. The priorities, some of the biggest priorities in the guiding principles is to end the first semester before the winter break. That's what drives the start date back to mid-August, and then ending prior to Memorial Day, I believe, is also a guiding principle. In addition, there's 5 or 6, and these are board policy, correct, Robin? Are these?
These are guiding principles. So the draft proposed calendars are created based on federally determined holidays, CDE parameters around minimum number of contact hours per the year, and guiding principles that were developed by a stakeholder group 6 or 7 years ago, which include, you are correct. So it is the location of the holidays that drive the beginning of the school year. And we had this conversation with the BVEA ARs and with BVEA Exec Board last week about how where winter break falls and the guiding principle that is one of the primary drivers, that first semester needs to fall there. So we have to then plan backwards to start the school year in order to finish first semester prior to winter break.
Kitty and then Shelley?
I do remember several years ago when my sons were in high school, the discussion around having to work on their assignments and over the break and come back and take finals. And I remember it was a relief to a lot of people to move it so that they weren't preparing for finals during that break time. But you just reminded me of how that count takes place. Thanks.
You are exactly right. And the other part of that conversation is giving high school seniors the opportunity to complete their college applications in response to rolling admissions at a variety of universities. And those are based on numbers and quotas, and in many universities on a first-come, first-served basis. So they wanted, in order to be as competitive as possible with students from other districts, to be able to complete the application process over the winter break, having their transcripts for first semester in hand to be able to do that.
Shelley?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. I remember all these discussions, and I remember that there was definitely a tension between high schoolers getting their finals done before they went on winter break, and all the rest of the district having to go to school early because of it. And there was a lot of discussion about that trade-off. And I think that we just, we weren't very creative then, and I don't think we're being very creative right now in terms of figuring out an alternative where maybe the high schoolers don't have finals right before Christmas or the winter break, but they also don't have them right afterwards. There's no reason that says they have to come back and on day one take a final. There could be weeks before you gave them their final exams for the first semester. So I think we're just sort of arbitrarily limiting ourselves when we say that that has to be a guiding principle of the calendar.
Any other comments on the consent agenda items? Tina, anything else?
Nope.
Hearing none, then Laura, can you please call the vote on the motion?
Benford. Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Gebhardt.
Yes.
Marquis. Myers.
Yes.
Sargent.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Board members, if it's all right, I'd like to just take a 5-minute comfort break, and then we'll wrap up quickly. Okay, we're going to call the meeting back to order and move on to our first study item, which is the CASB Fall Delegate Assembly. So just so that people who haven't been following this, who may be following this on TV, I'll just give a 2-minute recap of where we are. The Fall Delegate Assembly for CASB is next week. It's on Saturday. Friday is the fall convention, and I urge any of you who want to attend that. It should be a great program to come down. It's at the Cheyenne Mountain Resort in Colorado Springs. And then Saturday is the delegate assembly. You don't have to be a delegate to come. You can come and watch, and I think it's a really interesting exercise in the democratic process. I've watched once before I was a delegate. And so the way this works is school districts can submit proposed resolutions, and then the Legislative Resolutions Committee reviews them, and all of the resolutions that are submitted are brought forward to the delegate assembly. But as you saw in the book, some are brought forward with the recommendation of the Legislative Resolutions Committee, and others are not. And it's mostly because if you didn't get a thumbs up from the committee, it was because we didn't have a unanimous vote to go forward. It wasn't that necessarily they thought it was a bad idea. So then you guys all reviewed those, and then thank you for taking the time. Thank you, Laura, for putting together a spreadsheet of all these resolutions, and for all of you taking the time to give me the feedback, because I think having looked at this, I have pretty clear marching orders about what I should be doing down at the delegate assembly. Part of it is a little squishy because things will change on the floor. And so with this packet, I feel better than I did last year, having, knowing where you guys stand on everything. I've looked through all of this, and I don't see any places where we really need to have a whole lot of discussion, because it's pretty clear where the board stands. And we also had some discussion before. What I'd like to say is that while the process isn't perfect, in fact, it's probably far from perfect, next year, maybe what we might want to do is have a conversation to make recommendations to CASB about how we might improve this process, because I think there's some legitimate concerns about, are we getting too nitpicky? What is the proper role for these resolutions? What's the proper role for when we go forward? What I'd like to see personally is I'd like to see CASB take some of the resolutions that have a lot of support from the delegates and actually maybe be affirmative in finding bill sponsors and actually taking an affirmative position, as opposed to just supporting or not supporting things as they come up in the legislative session. That's a conversation for a later date. So on the process piece, I think we can't really change the process a week before the delegate assembly. But what I'd like to know is, does anybody have anything they want to tell me that they feel strongly about before I take this packet with me next week? Any guiding principles, I have a pretty good sense of where we are, but I'm happy to take any information. And the reason I say it's squishy is because things can happen on the floor with amendments, and I feel like I have a pretty good sense of where you would want me to vote on those. And since I am representing all of you, I will follow that your will on this, because I really do appreciate you taking the time to come forward. Tina, and then Donna.
Yeah, just in terms of feedback back to CASB, it would, for me, my most important resolutions are the standing resolutions. And I feel like BVSD can more or less take care of a lot of the other things. Those are district level procedures. And if we get enough funding, we can choose to invest in recycling if we wish, or whatever it is. And, there are some exceptions, like with the Claire Davis Act protections and the ability to meet an executive over contract negotiations. But I think it would be helpful if there was a way that you could add the weightedness or the priorities, because I think it's just so unrealistic that the CASB legislative or advocacy team can pursue more than a couple things. And this doesn't really have any weighting in the document, and that would be some feedback I would extend to the CASB board.
Thanks, Tina. I think it'll be helpful, and as I said, maybe next year we can calendar this so that we can have some conversation ahead of time to give the board feedback as to how to improve this process. Anything else, Tina?
No, I'm good. Thank you for all your work on this, and good luck.
Thanks. Okay, Donna?
I just want to reiterate what you said to Laura. Thank you. It was really nice to see a nice form that we could fill out, comment on, put undecided yes or no. So to Kathy, my question would be, would we get to see the results of kind of how we stood as a board on these?
I just sent you a PDF that has the responses minus the names.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, Laura, because we haven't had this in the past, so it is really helpful. Sam?
I just say, I agree with Tina, the standing resolutions are the most important to me, alignment with our legislative platform, and I trust you if amendments start flying around to use your best judgment on behalf of the board, and I appreciate the extra time you're putting in to be there. So thanks.
Yeah. Oh, Shelley, go ahead.
Just curious, was there support for the dyslexia amendment? Because if, on this board?
Remind me which number that is, and I'll look it up.
It was late. I don't know.
I'll let you know. Hold on a second.
Okay, because if there wasn't, I want to lobby.
30.
Thank you.
I didn't flag it as one that there was any question on.
Okay.
Yeah, overwhelming support.
Thanks.
30. Any other comments? I think to Sam, to your and Tina's point about the standing resolutions as being important, I agree, but then there's like the two that Tina identified, which is the Claire Davis Act and the negotiations that I think are important to boards. But then to rate those as, to Tina's point, is the same as using a cell phone. I just don't think those are quite the same. So maybe there needs to be some kind of prioritization, especially because if you're the lobbyist, you want to know what the highest priorities are when you're down there, right? And what are the lower priorities? So that might be really helpful information for the CASB board when we go forward. And there will be a way as we go along through the session, which I'll be happy to give to all of you, for you to, they have a bill tracker on the website, and then they have ways for you to engage through Twitter and through postings and all of that as things come up. For example, the dyslexia, for you to be able to send things out to legislators, which I think we already know how to do, but I'm happy to provide those links and those abilities as we go forward. So thank you for all of your hard work on this, because I know this was time consuming, and I'm open if after you've read this, you still have some questions or comments, just send me an email. I'll be fine with that. And I'll give them to, or send it to Laura, and she can send it out and add it to the document so that we all have the same information and we're all on the same page. Okay, are we good? All right, so I think our final item on the agenda is agenda setting. And Sam, did you have something you wanted to add to?
Coming back to those reports on fundraising that that we saw earlier this week. I think, it's just troubling when you see some elementary schools raising close to 200,000 or even more. And there may be generous individual gifts one year that skew those, but it's a trend we've seen for many years that there are some schools that can raise well into six figures and other schools that are lucky to get out of four figures. And Board Policy KH is partly a response to that, to try to offset that. And I should be clear, I'm not just talking about our title schools. There are some additional supports provided to help offset that, but this is also an issue for, schools that are just in catchment areas that are more, working class families. They just can't raise as much as schools in affluent areas. And so I'm not sure if, given everything else on our plate, I would at least like to put it out there for our next prioritization session to see where the board is at. And then I know in the cycle of policy review that we've established, KH will come up, and I would look forward to the discussion then. Perhaps an adjustment there could help. So that's
what I was going to suggest is when we're looking at policies, maybe this can jump the line to something else if that's what we want to do when we do prioritization. And I share your concern, but I would add to that charter schools opt out of this. And I get that we don't have much control over that, but that causes me some concern as well. So I think it would be helpful to have that conversation at some point. Absolutely. Donna? Anything else on the?
That was my only topic.
Okay, Donna?
I would, Rob already alluded to this and talked about the sub-issue and concerns in our district, and I want to see us take that up seriously. We all received a letter from one of the subs, I think we all did, and then I was on a phone call today with a substitute teacher, and sometimes she said it's not necessarily about pay. I totally enjoy this, but pay is one aspect of it, and if we want our lessons to go seamlessly when our teachers are out, we need to have quality subs, and they need to feel that they're compensated. And she said, we'd like to see, and we're not talking benefits as far as medical and things like that, but she said, our teachers get RTD discounts, and we don't. So there's little things, she said, we could do to incentivize some of our subs and pat them on the back, so.
Tina, do you have anything on agenda setting?
Yeah, I think I was going to do it as an RFI, but I was just going to ask if we would see any significant positive impact from the change in the fee structure for RTD with the new 70% decrease in fares for students. That's about it.
Okay. Anybody else on agenda setting? Shelley?
I received another email from that gentleman who was wondering about our memorial policy. And it's been on that list for a very long time, and it seems like a fairly simple thing to resolve. So I would love to see that just get on the list or get on an agenda in the near future here.
Okay. Anything? Richard?
I'd like to see if we can't get into some discussion on this public participation at board meetings to get some more clarification, because I'm a little confused in terms of what the gentleman from the bullying project was trying to get on the agenda, couldn't get on the agenda for X number of reasons. I'd like to see if we can get some discussion on that and get that resolved.
So Richard, do you think you could do an RFI on that so that we could figure out what the history is and what the language is, and then we could talk about putting it on the agenda? Would that be all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Question about the memorial policy. Is that something that just wasn't prioritized through the quarterly prioritization? Is that where that one is sitting?
Oh, Tina, I think so.
Okay, I think we have another prioritization coming up.
That's what I think so.
It's just such a small thing.
But we should talk about it, because I know it's one of the frustrations with our process, so.
Yes.
It's almost like the CASB thing. Can we prioritize big and small, right, when we're doing the priorities? The smaller things that don't take up much time, maybe we can figure out a different way to deal with that. Tina, do you know when our next prioritization meeting is? Laura?
December 18th, I believe.
It's December, she said.
I think it's December 18th. Let me look at a calendar.
That'll be here before we know it.
While she's doing that, I do have something else to add.
Sure, go ahead, Shelley.
I think we all got the email from the person who wants to take the Rocky Flats issue to the Department of something. And
I don't remember seeing it either.
yeah,
Uh,
I don't think we all got that, Shelley.
okay, maybe
Yeah,
just.
I don't think I got that.
Okay, well, so Sam and I got it, for sure. It's the people who came to us and made the case that we should have a resolution against having field trips to Rocky Flats, and the board voted that we would do that. And we were sort of on the leading edge. Since then, I think 7 other districts have passed resolutions saying they don't want their kids at Rocky Flats. And so now they want to take the next level, and they're requesting that the federal government step in. Right, and they're wondering if we would sign on as a board. They asked us individually, I said I would sign on, but then the request came back to me, would the whole board be interested in supporting them in that effort? So I don't know if we can put that on agenda setting or.
That's what I would think. What's their timing?
Well, could you also send the letter to the whole board?
Yes, yeah, we can do that.
Great.
Donna?
I just had a question on, I do remember that. I wasn't on the board. I was watching it. And I was quite impressed by the presentation. But didn't the board vote, no, we don't have the field trips there? Am I correct? Okay.
Shelley, you brought that forward, and it was great. The presentation was really helpful. It's helped me when I've been reading the commentary since then in the newspaper, so I appreciated that.
Scientists who came to talk to us were very convincing. So.
Yeah, they were. All right, anything else on agenda setting? Laura has something.
Quarterly planning is definitely on December 18th.
Okay. All right. Tina, anything else before we adjourn?
No, great job. Thank you.
All right, then with that, thank you all. With that, we're adjourned.